America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, and thanks so much for joining us today. You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. Today, we are very excited to be joined by Dave Brat. Dave is the Senior Vice President of Business Relations at Liberty University. He's also worked in the private sector for the accounting firm Arthur Andersen and for the World Bank, assisting developing world economies. And he served as a congressman from Virginia. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Elaine. Always great to be with the Job Creators Network.
Yeah, so I'm excited because you are going to be joining us for our second Freedom Fighters Gala, Summit and Gala in Savannah, Georgia, May 1st and 2nd.
Awesome.
Very excited. You're going to be there with a whole host of conservative leaders and, thought leaders who are going to talk about many, many issues from the economy to the debt and deficit, regulations, taxes. You're going to be talking on our education panel. And I just want to, for our audience, read through what this panel is and who some of the folks are going to be on with you.
Great.
This is called Education Freedom USA, Make America Smart Again by putting parents and states in the driver's seat. There's an education revolution happening across the country. Students have been trapped in their schools based solely on their zip codes for too long. Conservative governors are putting parents back in the driver's seat through education savings accounts that allow state education funding to follow the students. And that's so important. How can conservatives sell these wins to the public and encourage more states to follow in their footsteps? The panelists are great. We've got former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett, yourself, Erica Donalds, who is also Congressman Byron Donalds' wife, but she is a force in this area and very passionate about it. And of course, you'll be joining us. So I'm excited, but we talked a little bit offline and you talked how you've been in this space for a long time on education freedom and universal school choice. A lot of people call it different things. Tell me a little bit about your background there.
Well, I'll just start off with a 1-minute biography. My whole life has basically been education, right? So I went to college in Hope College in Holland, Michigan, a bunch of Dutch people, theologian types, loved it, had 3 great mentors there that made all the difference. And I had great high school, middle school. I had a middle school band teacher that was a real motivator, leader. And then I went to work at Arthur Andersen, like you said, but then I went to Princeton Seminary for 3 years and went on a capital semester. Worked at Wesley Seminary, and then my advisor down there said, I was working with a bunch of liberal groups in the religion space in the God box right across the street from the Supreme Court. And I said, back then there was these people called liberals. I liked all the liberals. I was friends with all of them. They had good, faithful, good hearts. They cared about the kids and ending wars and all this kind of thing. But they did not know economics or business. And so my advisor worked for the State Department and whatever. He said, well, why don't you come do your PhD with me at American in economics, and then you can help them, do better policy. And so that was kind of my life calling. And I worked for the World Bank a little bit in that period. I worked at the Army a little bit, but it's all education. Then 5 years PhD in economic growth and everything else under the sun they make you study. And then I taught at a liberal arts college for 20 years. I taught philosophy, theology, mainly economics and business. And then I went to Congress, and then Jerry Jr. called me up after I lost to the deep state. Get into that later. But he called me and said, you want to come to Liberty University? And so I was the dean of the business school, which is great students over here. They're unbelievably good, ethical, hardworking students. And now I'm senior VP. I'm going around selling the school and the education project. And it's an easy sell, right? The people are hungry for it right now. The K-12, everybody knows the COVID period. The parents found out what's going on. They're not happy. Now higher ed is under scrutiny, the Ivies, the anti-Semitism, et cetera. And I'll just close with this. People may not know, but you mentioned the history of things. Harvard was founded. John Harvard came from, Oxford, Cambridge, England, came over here, started Harvard in 1640. The motto at Harvard was truth for Christ and church. I don't think so much anymore. Right. And I went to Princeton Seminary. James Madison went there, stuck around, was the first graduate student in Hebrew. And so no one knows any of this stuff anymore. In K-12, they don't teach who Socrates is, who Plato is, who Moses is, the Enlightenment, the history of reason itself. So my life has been connecting the faith and human reason in the education establishment. And there's just been a serious deterioration, right? And now we're ranked, out of the rich countries near the bottom in terms of reading, science, math scores. K-12, I did regressions on that stuff in Virginia for a decade. Studied all the pieces you need in K-12, and the scores there have been flat as a pancake for 40 years. Eric Hanushek is the guy at University of Chicago. He's the economic expert on education, and he's got a graph, right? The test scores are flat as a pancake, spending's through the roof, and the only thing that's gone up with the spending is the spending on bureaucrats and administrators. The money's not going to the kids. So Job Creators Network, I applaud, and Bill Bennett, I had a funny story there. I was working in a garden helping cut the lawn and weed the guy's lawn, so I got cheaper rent in the basement in D.C., and Bill Bennett goes walking by, is by the National Cathedral. I said, Bill, someday I'm going to work for you. And he goes, hey, kid, looks like you got a good job right there. And so I've seen him since, and I told him that story. He started laughing. He's a great guy. So I look forward to being on the panel.
Awesome. I'm so glad you guys are going to be on the same panel together. That's great. So President Trump has come in like a whirlwind. I mean, what he's done in just 2 short months is nothing short of miraculous.
Yeah, it is.
But he nominated and confirmed Linda McMahon as the Secretary of Education, and her job was to end her job.
Yep.
So tell us, can you give me an overview and give our audience an overview of what closing the Department of Education will do for education? How does that help the kid in Illinois right now who can't read in the 4th grade?
Yeah. Well, I'll do it in 2 parts. First, the politics. A lot of Republicans have talked about this, but we've been very weak over the last 40 years in terms of doing. The left continues to take ground and move down the football field, and then Republicans get in and slow them down a little bit, but we never make progress. And so Trump, Linda McMahon, and the AFPI, the America First Policy Institute, she came to Liberty for our CEO Summit last year and just loved our kids. And so people don't realize in order to help the kids, you've got to get rid of some of this sclerosis. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think there's some, 5,000 administrators up there that provide work for 50,000 administrators down at the local and state level. This is just administrators. And none of this money is going to the kids. And so the Illinois Policy Institute, I think, has a stat out. The poor kids in Chicago, right, while the left is having the summer of joy and all this kind of thing, if they would have walked out the doors, the poor kids in Chicago, 3rd grade, have a 12% literacy rate, 88% illiterate reading in the 3rd grade. And of course, in the public schools, the way the rules went with the testing regime, if you don't pass in the 3rd grade, there's supposedly going to be, some interventions to help the kids to learn how to read. Right. But then they just changed the benchmark. They changed from a high hurdle to a low hurdle. And you pass all the kids on through 12th grade, and if you can't read in the 3rd grade, you can't go on and read the instructions in 4th and 5th, right? So it's a terrible snowballs. Cycle. Yeah. And so, I think everybody kind of shares, even on the left and some liberals and friends and whatever, giving the money to the parents and the kids is just common sense. There's people with, I worked in Virginia, the Virginia Senate for 7 years on school choice with a leading senator in Virginia. And we worked with kids with disabilities, autism. We had separate bills. some of this, more creative thinking provided them with way better solutions than fighting your school board for extra money. You have to fight the system in order to get your kid educated. And so just having the money, and Trump, now the critique was getting rid of Title I for the poor kids. And that's not true. That money's going to go to the students. It's going to follow the students in their backpacks instead of to the bureaucracy. And you ask the parents, black, brown, Hispanic, blue collar, they all like it. But in Virginia, when it got to it, you could hear the school board, right? The feet of the school boards and the school unions and the powerful forces in politics that are all funded by that money, right? And so they're fighting that. It's a fight against the bureaucrats, against the parents. And so this new innovation is great. It's much needed. The Republicans have been very slow on it, but Trump is just cracking the ice on everything. Thank goodness. And it's a one-time opportunity. I hope the House takes full advantage of this short little window in history that we get, and then the Senate. And
so let's just give an example. Let's just use an example of one that I'm familiar with. Is Iowa. Governor Kim Reynolds has passed universal education freedom in her state. Every single child, every single parent who wants to move their child into a different school, different zip code, private school, it's worth $8,000. $8,000 of taxpayer dollars will follow that child if they want to do homeschooling, private school, parochial school, or just another public school. Those tax dollars will follow them. And that allows children who are in failing zip codes that they're not trapped there. I mean, this is truly the civil rights issue of our time and does affect poor communities. So tell me why. Why are the Democrats, why would the teachers union make the argument that this is going to hurt education if you allow children to go to schools where it just may be a different learning environment and it's better for them because maybe it's smaller or maybe it's more one-on-one or, maybe it's a bigger environment. But what's their big argument against it?
Well, I don't think you really hear the rational argument, right? The data go against their arguments. And so it really is just, and if you just look, I hate to get political. All political views are my own. I don't speak for the school or anything. But it just kind of mirrors the national conversation right now. Back when I ran, there was the Tea Party energy. And I've had a bunch of newspapers call me and say, is this on the left? Now the left is rising against Schumer and they want, more leftist grassroots movement coming up. Is that like back when you did? I said, well, it is because they've discovered this thing called the uniparty, right? And neither side, the grassroots don't like that, right? They control the giant spreadsheet in the sky, I call it, the money. But I said, but ours are very different than on the left. We had the Tea Party, which was taxed enough already. And then we had the 07-08 financial crisis and $1 trillion bailout of the banks, and the middle class was left with nothing. And then, the immigration issue in this election, the endless wars in this election were all in the top 2 or 3 issues. And so on the conservative side, we have those issues that are motivating the grassroots. But on the left, it's kind of like what you were just saying. What argument are they making? And that's what I told the folks in the press. I said, maybe you can tell me. I said, I'm not making this up. I do not think they have an argument. They want political power. The groups want to attain their jobs, their bureaucracies, their friends, their networks that rely on government spending. And then you just phrased it, kind of in a fun way that's so truthful. It's just, these tax dollars are going to go to the parents. And what that really means is our money is going to go back to us, right? Too many people, even on the conservatives, they think tax dollars are owned by the government. And I was like, we pay in that money, right? And so the idea that it's a radical idea for the money that you pay in to help your kid, this moment is a perfect moment in education. And so all the programs and projects you just mentioned are much needed.
So let me ask you sort of I'm going to ask you a scenario question, because we've got, red states and blue states. I'm not trying to be political, but we've got red states and blue states. That's just the reality. Republican governors, Democratic governors. When you think about a state like Florida, I live in Florida, so we
Yep.
have universal education freedom here was passed under DeSantis,
Right.
wildly successful, just like
Yep.
Kim Reynolds in Iowa. And so if the Department of Education goes away and all of those millions and millions, billions of dollars that are in
Yep.
their budget then gets sent to the states, to the
Yep.
state government to manage education within their states, that's great in a state like Florida, where we have universal education freedom. But what about a state like Illinois, or what about a state like California or
Yeah.
New York, where those states are not aligned with the idea of education freedom and allowing kids to go to the school of their choice, where
Yep.
their parents think they'll learn best? How do you think that gets managed? Should it go to the individual counties? Or I mean, it was a question I saw posed to the president, and I'm not sure that I heard an answer that I understood on how
Yeah.
you deal with that piece of it.
Yeah, well, that's a good. I don't know the answer either. Most people don't know the way the education is funded. The feds only fund about 10% of it, and then in the states, it's about 45% local and 45% state. So when that federal money goes down to the states, I don't even want to make a guess on it, but I'd guess maybe they kind of split it up that way. Half go to the localities and half go to the states. So that'd be kind of common sense. But that's what's great about this, because the states that don't administer that money properly for the kids, the parents are going to get upset. And I hate to look at another issue, but in economics, it's fairly simple. You vote with your feet, right? I mean, that's the metaphor in economics. You substitute toward lower prices. You vote with your feet. And so the SALT tax, I don't really like that thing. The government making up for the higher taxes in the Northeast and these other progressive states that have gone bankrupt and are losing industry. California particularly comes to mind. That's the last thing you want to do, is make up for failure, right? You want those people to vote with their feet. So the answer to your question is what's going to happen? Well, those parents are going to see these other states doing great things for other people's kids. And either they're going to get upset at their own legislators and say, what in the world are you doing? These other people have choices and all sorts of cool programming going on. And I was in Virginia. I went out east in Virginia. They had a private charter school out there. It's kind of quasi-private and public. And they had the police lined up, shaking hands, all the kids every morning, 40 of them, and firemen. And then they had a stock market game and a tennis program and all sorts of entrepreneurial ideas built in. And the kids they all went to college out of the poorest city in Virginia, one of the poorest. And so that's what can happen. And then I just want to put on my economic hat for a minute and just say, if you go to the Nobel Prize winners in economics, Robert Solow, economic growth, and Mankiw at Harvard, I did my dissertation on him. But roughly speaking, education, human capital, is responsible for 1/3 of economic growth in the country. Right? It's kind of broken into threes, that capital investment. Trump's bringing back capital now, right? You see Taiwan, $100 billion in chips factories, right? That kind of capital, not financial capital. Real capital, you put that in the hands of American workers and the wages go up. And that's very much tied to education. So human capital is responsible for 1/3 of economic growth, which is anemic. CBO has us growing at 2% for the next 30 years. And then capital is responsible for 1/3, and technical growth is responsible for 1/3. But technical growth kind of inures only to the rich, right? And that's good, because it enhances your economy, and over time, everybody gets the benefits of that innovation. But in terms of wage jobs, right, for the poorest of the poor, we need to get human capital moving to give these kids some hope. And so on economic growth grounds, I wish I heard more conversation about that, but no one ever mentions human capital, that education is. Those K-12 test scores are critical, not only for your economy, but also for national defense. If you want to even go that far, the Chinese, there's film strips. They got 400 kids in a row, all synchronized bouncing basketballs together. 400 kids, right? Their kids are highly disciplined, educated, ready to roll. We got to get moving.
I've heard Secretary Bennett say that the tax dollars should go back to the parents.
Yep.
And I've heard the other side talk in terms of, well, if we take money out of the public school system because kids are going to a different, an alternative type learning environment, whatever it is, private, parochial, that the public school system will somehow suffer because they won't have those funds. And I see it differently. And you tell me if I kind of see things usually just really simply, is that if it turns into a competition of, can you make your school better to attract those dollars, then
Right.
don't we have a free market system going on in education? Because the private schools right now compete for your dollars because you're already paying taxes for the public school system. So they're competing hard and trying to give a great reason why you want to not only pay your taxes for the public system, but then pay extra money to go to a private school. Now, we're going to force the public school system to have to compete for those same dollars. It'll be one pot and they're all competing for it. Wouldn't you think that the quality of education across the board would just get better?
One would think so. Bernie and AOC have been lighting up the country. And the only thing they can come up with is the oligarchs. All the oligarchs, by the way, were on the left, right? Zuckerbucks and all this stuff. I don't need to repeat this. But they're against monopoly and oligopoly, a few firms in a market. So this is great. I mean, because I'm with them. I like Adam Smith and James Madison roughly had that logic. You want a bunch of small businesses competing against each other, right? And Madison in politics want a large number of small factions competing. It's healthy. It keeps you vibrant. And so, yeah, they're against oligarchs, but the public school system is a monopoly. And so what you just said is exactly right. I mean, it's just stunning to me that they can defend, and then they say it's going to hurt the public schools. But yet, in their own language, you don't hear them mention the kids.
Nope.
It's not going to hurt the kids. And over time, right, it's just like now we're trying to enhance our productivity by bringing capital back to this country. In the short run, markets are getting all jittery. Whoop-de-doo. I care about the real economy. The stock market, 90% of stocks and bonds are owned by the richest 10%, right? And that's Federal Reserve data. That's not, crazy stats on the website. And so, Trump has said, he came out and said, he says, look, I'm going to fix the economy. The markets, and he's pretty astute, right? I mean, he watches, if the markets get too jittery, then all of a sudden he makes some adjustments. So he's smart. He knows more than they give him credit for. And so same with education, right? Of course, there's going to be a little bumps, adjustment period. But my word, I don't think you can get any worse than what we're doing for our kids right now. I mean that seriously. If you think what we're doing to our kids right now is just, they can't even read or write. We should be educating them in business, entrepreneurship, ethics, in my view, religion. I taught the Enlightenment philosophers, right? Aristotle and Kant and Bentham and Mill. And there's only one problem with all the most sophisticated philosophical ethics. They don't have any followers. On the other hand, 7 billion people on the planet are religious. But for some reason, the elitists won't let us teach religion, the ethics that the whole world lives out, right? The Confucians and the Buddhists and the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians and the Hindus and whatever, right? I mean, it just makes no sense that you cannot learn what is good. That is the central question of ethics. And if you ask an average kid what's good, then they'll say, well, it's when you do good things. Well, that's called a tautology. That's circular. Right? So that's the whole trick. What is ethical?
That wants their child to learn religion in school, they can take their universal education dollars.
They can do it, right?
And send them to a parochial school and have them learn all of those things.
Right.
And that's the beauty of education freedom and choice. And, and maybe your child just learns better in a different environment, but it should be the parents' choice. Parents should be back in control. I mean, remember the famous debate between Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin? I mean, that was an insight into exactly how that side thinks, is that parents don't have the right to know. They don't have the right to be in control, and they don't have the right to make decisions. And to hear that, I mean, you saw the backlash in Virginia, but then it just escalated across the country as COVID came and our kids were sitting in front of screens learning nothing.
Yeah. No, I think you put your finger that. If you had to summarize this whole debate and this whole discussion, it's probably that, right? You're putting control of education back with the parents. The parents are in charge of your own kids. No one loves the kid more than the parent. And so, that's your ultimate decision maker. And then, federalism or in religious traditions, they have the same kind of thing. But the basic principle is you start at the lowest level, at the local level, right? If you can't solve the problem there, then you go to the state. Mm-hmm. And then the last resort, if they can't solve it at the state level, you go to the federal. But now we've got it in reverse, right? Because the lobbyists are smart and they're efficient. And they know if you spend $1 million on a lobbyist, you can get $1 billion in education funding coming to you, or national science projects, or whatever it is in industry. And that system is bankrupting us, right? We're $37 trillion in debt right now, and we're running $2 trillion deficits. And so the bad news for the school system is there is not more money coming anyway. Right, we're bankrupt, right, and mm-hmm. all the Fed watchers. I mean, I'm dead serious on that remark, right? Everyone will tell you that. The financial folks will tell you we're in rough shape, and so we better learn how to be really productive and how to teach the kids. And I cracked a joke back in my political days, and they put it on the front page of the Washington Post or whatever. But I said Socrates and Plato are two of the smartest guys that ever lived, and they learned on a pile of rocks. So the Washington Post says, Dave Brat says, give them rocks. And that wasn't the point. The point is the mind is an incredible gift from God, which is perfectly capable of learning without tons and tons of money. The brightest people in history read books and got very smart. Our founders were all like 28 years old, right? And just brilliant in Latin and Greek and everything under the sun, the Judeo-Christian West. And, so that we got, and I should say this is going to require discipline. That's what's missing. And the parents, for this to be successful, have to get serious too, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody's got to look in the mirror and say, it's time to get this right. And I'm going to take the time to do the right thing for my kid, my community. And there's a lot of really unfortunate kids that are living in poverty or have health serious issues. And we got to team up as communities and help them, maybe through churches and synagogues and whatever. But that's part of what's missing. And when we do that, we're going to find, hey, we get way more joy doing that than we do from buying another consumer good, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe this could really, if we get thinking again and get smart again, like you said, it could really solve a lot of social problems.
Yes, it's Education Freedom USA, Make America Smart Again.
Smart Again, love that.
Yeah,
love it.
Great title. So yeah. Let's talk about the summit and gala again before we go.
Yeah.
It is the second Freedom Fighters Summit and Gala. It is May 1st and 2nd in Savannah, Georgia at the Westin Hotel right there on the river. We're going to have Mike Gallagher from Salem Radio, national talk show radio host. He'll be emceeing the entire thing. And we're going to have great folks there. Stephen Moore will be there. Governor Brian Kemp of the great state of Georgia will be welcoming everyone on the night one. Kellyanne Conway will be speaking as well. Hugh Hewitt from Salem Radio as well will be giving a keynote. Governor Glenn Youngkin from Virginia will be keynoting the Black Tie Gala that night. And we're still going to have fun, Dave. We're going to have fun because we're going to have Rob Schneider, who is the actor and comedian. Will be there to entertain us. We'll be dancing to yacht rock music. And of course, we'll have Lee Greenwood there to sing his famous song, God Bless the USA. So it's going to be just a great time.
Yeah.
For you all listening, you can go to JCN 2025summit.com. You can register for tickets there. Please come out and join us. That's May 1st and 2nd in Savannah, Georgia. Dave, I can't wait to see you and catch up with you and see you and Secretary Bennett on the education panel next month. I can't wait.
It's going to be great. The fun thing about the conservatives is, like, if you look at Elaine's face right now, she's smiling. We know how to have fun. I can't dance at all, but I'm going to have fun. And last year at the event, it's just fun, people. We can crack jokes. We can even differ with each other. No big deal. Debate, and we leave all friends and smarter. And it's a great event.
You were on the economics panel with Charlie Gasparino, and that panel ran, I think, 45 minutes over.
It was great. We had fun. That was a riot.
But no one left the room. No one left the room. It was like 5 guys who went to the bar and were arguing over sports, except we were talking about the economy.
And we're all buddies.
Hilarious.
Right.
It was so funny. So yeah, it's going to be a good time. I'm excited. But
Yep.
anyway, Dave, thanks so much for coming on and talking
Great.
about this and kind of previewing the panel. I appreciate it. I know
Yep.
your insights on education is great. Thank you all so much for joining Main Street Matters to listen in. We are America's small business megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday, and you can tune into the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll be back soon with another episode.